Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today in a little stitching session creating a briefcase, bridal leather briefcase. And as the title suggests, I am stitching on a handle. So this is our bridal leather handle from a previous course, and that is what I am stitching in. So it is attached via D-rings to the handle attachments, which are these pieces here, which are very thick leather. So at the moment there's, as you can see, 2 rivets in there, but they're just there for alignment. So I'm threading my needles here using John James 004 double-04 needles with Fil Chinois 432 thread, and I'm using a matching colour. So I'm going to start proceedings with a couple of back stitches. So the first 3 holes, I'm going to open those up. And then switch to my trusty round or with a little bit of beeswax on there, because we're going through pretty much 2, 4, 6, 8 millimeters of leather, plus a little reinforcement. Sometimes a little beeswax on a round or just helps you to thread your needles through. As you can see, easily stitching 8 millimeters of leather. Now going back on myself for the back stitch. So this is the top of the handle, top of the handle attachment that gets the most stress. Although it's being supported by a rivet, we still want to double up on the thread, which also lessens the stress on the leather as well. You've got twice the surface area of thread. Going neatly side by side. And now the next one coming through. Again, neatly side by side. It's not just aesthetics that we put the thread when we backstitch beside itself. Okay, so it's not just the look of it, you know, the 2 pieces of thread. If it's overlapped, then all the stress is still essentially just on one piece, so it'll cut through the leather a little bit more easily as it wears over time. So when you have them side by side, you double up that thread. It spreads the load more evenly. Okay, moving back to a bladed awl now. So yeah, it neatens up the look, but there is a practical reason, a practical application for parallel pieces of thread on a backstitch. Now most of the tension is being taken on the rivet on this design. And this is a design probably more seen in vintage luggage and trunks even. This kind of handle attachment. It is sometimes seen on vintage briefcases, but it's something that I really like, that I wanted to integrate into this build. But a lot of the stress is taken by the rivet. So I'm not doing a cast on this, and that really maximizes the angles at the top, which looks really nice. I mean, does it add that much strength? It's more of an unraveling thing than adding more strength. So this is one of those reasons, or one of those instances where you really do have to have an awl. I mean, trying to smack a pricking iron through 8 millimeters of leather, and not just any leather, but you know, hard vegetable tan leather. I mean, I wonder if that's possible. It would create some horrendous holes, and if your pricking iron survived, it wouldn't be a good idea, put it that way. So it's definitely one of those examples where it's good to know how to use an awl. And for those of you who don't like using it while stitching, there's nothing wrong with, you know, placing it over a piece of cork or something like that and then going through first of all with your awl and then chasing it up with your stitching afterwards at a later date. And you can see how stiff this leather is because this this piece of leather acts like a board. Yeah, so it holds itself upright, which is quite handy. Rizky says, hi Philip, what do you think about waxing? Prefer using Coad, beeswax and pine rosin, or only using pure beeswax? You know, Coad, for those of you who don't know, COAD, is, as stated there, a mixture of beeswax and pine rosin. It tends to be very, very sticky. It's used most commonly in shoemaking, I believe, attaching the welt to the upper. I know very little about shoemaking, as you can probably tell. It tends to be very, very sticky. I think in leather goods, I mean, there's some applications that it might be useful, but I think it could potentially just attract a lot of dirt and dust, especially if you're using light colours in your thread. I think that's probably why you don't see it very often. I get the reasoning behind it. It adds a little bit of thread lock. But possibly at the cost of looking a bit dirty or collecting dust and dirt. Whereas on the inside of a shoe, which gets sealed off, I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. But saying that, I'm sure there's some application somewhere where it's there's an exception to that. So coming to the front now, so I'm going to switch this round in a second. Which I'm going to do now. So I'm going to open up these English clams, so they're preloaded, pre-tensioned, just with a block of wood. So just stick it in, twist it, and you can remove. Alright, so stitching the other side now, so lifting up my thread out the way. Again, block of wood, twist, open. Place that under there like that. Does that work? Maybe a little bit further forwards. See how that goes. All right. Needles back in. And we're underway. Be very careful when using an awl for this, because when you're going through very thick leather, it tends to require a lot more pressure. And if it goes through suddenly and your finger's right behind it, then, well, that's going to be a bad day, first of all. That's one of the reasons I think a sharp awl is a safer awl, because it doesn't require as much pressure, which means you can get a lot more control. Much like using a kitchen knife. Just going to push this forward a little bit in the clams. If I keep my body against it, it holds still a little bit more. And the awl I'm using for this one is actually a bit of a hybrid. It's an awl by Wooter Leather, but I didn't really like the blade that came with it. So I'm using a vintage Dixon's blade in there. So small, nimble awl haft, but a nice traditional awl blade in there. The one that comes with it, I think, is just, I don't know, it's very diamond-like. It's almost like a square. The Wooter Leather awl blades take quite a bit of work, in my opinion, to actually get them up to standard. Not quite sure why. Don't know what steel they use. But if you want to stick around and ask any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you. So coming to the end of this, the next thing is actually going to be stitching in a steel strip. It doesn't look like steel because it's been prepared with a special finish, a traditional finish that stops it from rusting. Spring steel, but of course we have to stitch this in first before we can then apply the steel strip on the inside, because if we don't, well, we're not going to be able to push our awl through steel, are we? So this part has to be stitched in. These rivets aren't actually in place at the moment. They're not actually riveted in. They're literally just placed in the holes of the handle attachments. And that way I can index it so I know that as I'm stitching it in, it's in the accurate place. Otherwise you could end up stitching it out with the holes out of sync, and then got to undo all your stitching again, which is not fun. So coming up to the end here. I've actually tapered these very slightly so they're thicker leather towards the top, which I think is, it's not common, but I think it gives a nicer look. So when you get towards the top it gets a little bit more difficult. And one more in there. Where are we? There we are. So our last stitch going in now. So I'm going to do a couple of back stitches. And although I haven't been casting it, I'm doing a little double cast on this one. Essentially just putting two overhand knots in each hole. And that way, if the worst happens and it wants to start unraveling for whatever reason, we've knotted it in place, so that really helps. So first back stitch going in, double cast, pulling in one side, pulling in the little knot, holding it, and then next one going in, little beeswax to help things go through, double cast, and there we go. Little snip snip. Then we can tuck those threads, add a little white glue, and then tap that down. So I'll show you what's going on the other side. So right now on this side here we can see I've prepared the leather. This is where our steel reinforcement is actually going to be put in place, and that gives the rivet something to actually rivet onto. Rather than just leather itself, which could actually eventually pull out. So these rivets, they're tight in there, but I can actually pull them out. And then there's a hole all the way through. So just using the rivets at the moment for indexing. And the rivets that I am using are highly polished, and I've added a logo to them. I'll show you in 1 second. So you can see they're a lot more polished, the light shines on them. And in the centre, although it's a very fine detail, we have the F for Finch, my brand, on there. So this is the course that I'm teaching at the moment. So this is the English bridal briefcase. It's not a hard briefcase like an attaché case, which I did previously in the Bloomsbury attaché case. This is a soft-sided briefcase. So sometimes called a document case. It can be used for laptops, documents, books, anything you like. So it's a bit of a tougher, stiffer, very traditional style of briefcase, as you can see from the handle. So this is the exterior part, and that's where it will bend to form the top of the briefcase. Steel will be going on the inside. Of course, there's another strip of leather that goes in underneath that to hide the whole assembly. But it will be the rivets for the handle attachments, then the handle itself, and the rivets will be going on for the shoulder strap attachment. So there's a D-ring on each end, which the shoulder strap will be attaching to with brass clips as well. So it keeps it a little bit more practical. I prefer, if holding a briefcase, to not have a shoulder strap. I prefer holding it. But if you're walking long distances, if you're commuting by train or something like that, then it makes sense to have a shoulder strap, especially if you're carrying a large heavy load. Tiago says, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Tiago. Thank you for joining me in the workshop today. Guys, don't forget, leathercraftmasterclass.com. I still have free hand stitching video if you're interested, if you're brand new to leathercraft, or you just want to see how I hand stitch up close with cameras on both sides, explaining the process. Leathercraftmasterclass.com. Don't forget to get your free download. So all you have to do is enter your email address and I will send it straight to your inbox. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And if you learned something, don't forget to leave a comment below and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.